we're going to get into something that has a lot of meat and potatoes in this. Machabo on fundamentals for those who want to become good at Guilty Gear. Hey, don't pay attention to this good at Guilty Gear portion here. Just think about this as a general guide to fighting games. It's one of the best articles I can think of giving strong descriptions of what you're supposed to do in neutral. So we should thank probably ShinjinBaiken first for the translation. His linked at the top of the article. I tweeted and I tagged him in this yesterday. It took a little bit of finesse to make this correct because it was made as like a video series. He made it into an article based on it. This is not only translated material, he said. While Machabo and Kazunoko's videos from God's Garden were used as a basis, several additions were made to improve the content. I'm sure it was a ridiculous amount of work. You guys are probably all familiar with Machabo. Extremely talented anime player, right? And then Street Fighter player lately. This is an article that was written a while ago. Yeah, in 2016, this was posted. So I'm sure the videos were filmed even a while before that. A lot of the examples in this are going to be Guilty Gear related, but I will give you examples in other fighting games. This is the beginning of it, and it says basics. Let's begin with anti-airs. It's crucial. One thing that I always say, the first thing that I always do when I get into a game is I figure out what my pokes on the ground are and what my anti-airs are. The reason is you cannot play the ground game of a fighting game if the opponent doesn't stay on the ground. He says there are many different ways to attack from the air in Guilty Gear. For example, forward jump, instant air dash, double jump, special moves, etc. You have to know which of your anti-air options are strong versus their air options. It is therefore a question of knowledge. And you're going to notice in this article, there's tons of situations versus this character. This is the tree of options that can happen. Understanding this tree and the risk reward of each option and what beats what is extremely important, and that will be important per matchup. So it says you can turn the tides of a game by successfully anti-airing. On the other hand, if you're weak at anti-airing, you could easily get bullied. Being good at anti-airing is crucial for mind games to happen. Otherwise, they get to jump in on you for free, and you don't get to play any grounded mind games. As a whole, there are 5 to 6 different types of anti-airs. Some of these will apply to games you play, some of these will not. Fast moves with tall hitboxes that hit high above the head. In Street Fighter, for instance, something like Urian Heavy Kick that hits really high, really fast. Kami back medium punch. Upper body invincible moves. So Faust 6P, Kai 6P, Soul 6P. In general, 6Ps in Guilty Gear. There's not as much of this kind of stuff in other games. There are some that are designed to be anti-airs. I think kind of universally in Grand Blue, crouching heavies are kind of like that, right? High and large moves, right? Just big chunky anti-air moves. Urian crouching heavy or like Bison crouching heavy. You have to be very early, like when you do stuff like this. Yeah, maybe Honda headbutt. Actually, headbutt, I guess, is probably what you would think about for upper body invincible moves. Invincible moves, uppercuts. Any kind of uppercut or move that will just chunk through everything. Air-to-air moves, right? Maybe Bison Hell Attack is a good example of another one, or jump back jabs or whatever. And then air throws. Characters that have air throws are great. In Guilty Gear, everybody can universally air throw. The point of this, though, is to say that all characters' moves are different. They're used in different ways and to varying degrees of success depending upon different characters in various situations. It is your job to find out what works versus what. And if it's possible to do it on reaction. Some are not like that. Sometimes you have to be prepared for the jump. You have to be ready for it. You have to be looking for it to do it. Air-to-airs are a lot like that. So knowledge is always the first and most important step. There are also moves that delay the jump in timing. One punishes this dive kick consistently by waiting and reacting, jumping up and blocking it, and then throwing it or hitting the opponent. Another approach you should be aware of is dashing and then FD breaking to crouching. Many instant air dash attacks whiff on crouchers, so you can actually just duck under instant air dashes in some situations depending on the character and who you are. This is all matchup specific, so it is up to you to find out. Notice that already in the first section of this, he said, hey, there's 6 different kinds of anti-airs. And it's your job to figure out what works versus what. It's your opponent. The only thing they have to figure out is, oh, he doesn't know how to beat my jump. Sick. The ground game doesn't have to exist. They can just jump at you. There's no fear, right? If you go to anti-air somebody with something and your anti-air doesn't work, it's not the game's fault. It doesn't anti-air that move. You either need to try something else, or if you have no anti-air option that beats it, you need to air-to-air, or you need to avoid the jump in whatever way. If this move doesn't work when you try to anti-air another move with it, it's not the game's fault if you keep continuing to try it over and over. You have to figure out what does, right? It's on you to do that. Learn neutral game by using the 3 structure. This is probably, I think, the most important part about the article for new players. If you can take anything from it, I recommend pulling this into your game. This alone, this idea, this concept will make you a better player. An active neutral game can be, in a large scheme of things, be divided into decisions regarding 3 different types of moves. Okiwaza, Atewaza, and Sashi Kaishi. We're going to simplify them and not use Japanese names because I assume most of you don't speak Japanese. The first one, means that you are preemptively making a move because it covers a certain space or because it wins versus certain moves or something like that. Being preemptive in neutral is hitting a far button that's really tough for your opponent to deal with, right? In Street Fighter, you might hit Poison's Crouching Heavy Punch. It takes up a large point of the screen. It's pretty hard to beat with most things. You don't think to yourself, okay, I'm gonna react to this, You're just doing it because it takes up a lot of space. Byakuya is 2C. Right? Byakuya is 2C. I mean, it just goes like half screen. So you just hit it half screen because it's good, and it's preemptively, I hit it to beat anybody moving into that range. Kami standing medium kick is another example of that. Urian Fierce. I'm mashing Fierce not because I'm trying to beat something on reaction or anything like that. I'm hitting it because it preemptively is good to stop a lot of stuff that people do. Catalina Heavy Punch in Granblue, or Fairy's Heavy Punch. Justin Wong is very good at playing characters that play this style of neutral. The second one means doing a move that will hit waiting opponents. This one I'll explain after the third one. The third one is waiting for the opponent to make a move and reacting to it. These two are kind of tied in, and what you'll notice about these three things is that it's a sort of rock, paper, scissors. So the second one is dashing in and hitting a low move, right? This is to beat opponents who are just sitting there waiting. I'm playing Kami. As soon as they whiff, I'm gonna do crouching medium kick drill or something. You're sitting there waiting for a movement. You're sitting there waiting for a jump maybe. You're gonna hit back medium punch when they jump. They dash at you and throw you. That is something that will throw you off and surprise you and stuff like that. The third one is waiting for them to make a move and then reacting to it. So that's the style we just described, how to defeat that. I'm gonna walk into their range, walk back. I'm gonna let them whiff, heavy punch into drill with Kami or something, or Gran standing heavy punch into boot, Byakuya 2C into Rekka, or whatever you're gonna do, right? These things are rock, paper, scissors. One will beat the other. You can kind of categorize decisions and game plans for characters or players into these three different things. A good example of that playstyle is Justin beating up Nemo. Nemo is someone who's running at you. Nemo's never really doing number one, and Nemo's never really doing number three. Nemo's kind of living in this life all the time. So it's why when he runs into a player that is playing under like this play style here, that's where he sort of struggles. If you understand the logic behind the three structure and therefore the mind games that emerge from it, I described this in like a footsie video I did about Itabashi versus Xiaohai, where Xiaohai was standing at a far range and he was preemptively hitting like a medium punch. That forced Itabashi to think to himself, he's preemptively buffering this medium punch into drill with Kami. So I won't hit a button. He recognizes what playstyle Xiaohai is committing to. So Xiaohai says, he sees that I'm gonna do this playstyle, so he thinks I'm gonna buffer this drill over and over. Now I'm gonna dash up and throw him. You have to send the message of what style of play you're committing to your opponent, so that way when you switch it up to the next thing, it just throws them off. So then Itabashi's like, okay, you know what? Fuck this, right? He wants to hit this medium punch or whatever. I'm gonna swing with my heavy. So then what does Xiaohai do? He stops hitting the medium punch. He just walks away. He whiffs this big heavy punch with Zangief. He hits heavy punch into drill. He's rotating his neutral options so that way Itabashi can't comfortably rely on him to be one strategy and go to one strategy to defeat it. Your opponent is constantly unsure of the kind of neutral style you're playing. The tips for long-term development are try to avoid doing risk-filled moves, i.e. greed severs in neutral, that wins you games online just because you win with them. Think long-term and you'll understand what's really beautiful about Guilty Gear. It becomes more enjoyable for you and the one you play against. Yeah, this is a good point. If you're not playing to be an EVO champion, you can just do whatever you want. But as they said, for long-term enjoyment and improvement, to feel the different mind games and the different adjustments between you and your opponent, you know, you should probably think about it in a way that's more based on improvement and making decisions that are well educated, right? Yeah, Snake Edge is actually a very good example, probably. Snake Edge is like this extremely slow, seeable low attack in Tekken that leads to a combo. And like when you're playing against other new players, it's like really hard to stop sometimes, right? But like once you get past like the very basic level of play, or you're playing offline, it becomes a pretty weak strategy. To correct a relatively common misunderstanding, you cannot do your go-to anti-air option on reaction against some moves. You cannot react anti-air to everything in the world. You just can't. You can't really like hyper focus on whiff punishing ground game stuff and like whiff punish everything consistently and anti-air people at the same time. Even if you can do both sometimes, doing both is almost impossible for people long term. It takes too much concentration and focus, and it's very easy to mess up. Therefore, you must do Okiwaza as anti-air, which is waiting. Or you have to find something else that you can do to use to an anti-air this type of move on reaction. Remember that more regular approach is doing moves that cover certain spaces, buffered into another move in case the previous move should hit. Under this sequence, you could advantageously both React if your move hits, or observe if your opponent jumps. You can dash and a crouch in similar ways because IED attacks often go over crouchers, and IED is like a harder to react thing to anti-air. You're playing Street Fighter and you walk up as Ryu and you go to do crouching medium kick into fireball, and your crouching medium kick comes out and it misses. It's like, oh, I was doing a fireball and now they're above my head. You just buffer an uppercut and you uppercut them. That's a really common neutral strategy in basically every fighting game. It is good to look upwards at the same time you are doing moves on the ground. If you're sticking out a far move and buffering something, or if you're backdashing, or you're doing something where you're otherwise committed, that doesn't mean it's like downtime where you're not thinking about what your opponent's doing or focusing on the screen. Decision making based on risk reward. This is one of my favorite parts about this article, actually. To be able to win more consistently, what are you thinking about when you make decisions? What is the mind game? It is important to know why you're making a decision. Let us review a 2 case study to emphasize this, right? Case study number 1, Soul jumps. On the way down, he does a low air dash jump /H, and it will win against Kai's 6P. That means Soul gets damage. Kai can, however, commit to an Okewaze 2H to win versus low air dash jump /H, which is damage for Kai. But Soul can instead choose to land and do Grand Viper or dash into 2D to punish a whiff 2H. If Kai has a burst and Soul doesn't have 50% meter, it is a guaranteed punish against Grand Viper. Therefore, the Kai player can now make a conscious decision based on the situation, based on risk reward. Based on the fact that I have bursts, based on the fact that I have this much meter, my opponent has this much meter, these are the things that I should try, or this is the decision I should make because of that. And there's one example of one thing, which is a jump. If I do this, then it loses to this and this, but those 2 things do less damage than the other option. So most of the time I should commit to this, unless he has meter or something, right? You should think about the situations like that. Risk reward is therefore not about avoiding all risks. It instead is about making conscious decisions, taking different factors into account, often positioning, damage, tension, and life. The simplest example of this that I can tell you guys is when you are fighting a character that has full meter in Street Fighter, and they walk up to you on the knockdown and they throw you, and you don't tech the throw. Why? Because your understanding of risk reward says, well, if I get thrown, we get reset back in a neutral position. Compared to the risk reward for teching and then eating 500 damage because you teched and then he walked back, baited the throw, and killed you. By playing games, you will find yourselves in types of situations that you need to know more about often. Doing your homework after games is important and fun because it gives both short-term results, you know what you're going to do against X, and long-term results. You learn how to think and build a knowledge base. You can't avoid risk. So Soul gets a knockdown in the corner, and he's going to jump. Like, what are the options he can do, and what does his opponent have to think about if he's Kai? Low air dash, that's a high. Empty jump low, wild throw. They didn't even put safe jump. They just kept it simple, 3 options. Even if you don't know anime games very well, you probably know overhead, low, command throw. You're Kai, what beats what? Kai's VT's uppercut wins versus low air dash, jump slash, and 2K, and command throw. It beats everything a Soul player does except empty jump in 2D. So that's your knowledge of the situation. What to do versus empty jump 2D? It's like, well, you can instant block it because it becomes punishable as long as he doesn't cancel it into something. And if he actually does commit to something, then the situation becomes really bad for him because it's kind of risky. But what to do versus a Soul that only blocks? You have to throw or you have to mash. He has a flowchart. Now he knows the options of this situation. I got knocked down in the corner. Soul's going to mix me up. These are my options. It isn't about finding an absolute answer. It is instead about understanding the situation and making a conscious decision based on the risks that are present. And as this article goes, they get more and more in-depth where they start talking about different option selects you can implement. They start talking about fuzzy jump and fuzzy mash and stuff like that. There's a lot of things, right? It gets more and more and more and more complicated, and to the point where we start looking at all kinds of stuff. Fuzzy jump, fuzzy abare, fuzzy block, fuzzy throw, fast in decisions, mind game. Like, this thing is extremely in-depth. It's fantastic. If you're newer to fighting games or even an intermediate player, I think you should be happy just learning this. The three structure and understanding anti-airs. Until you understand those things, you can't continue down the article anyway. You know, you learn the things as you go down, right? You begin with anti-airs. It literally tells you, you have to know anti-airs. If you don't know anti-airs, you literally cannot play the next part of this. It says, until you understand how to anti-air a jumping opponent, who cares if you know how to play on the ground? The minute they jump at you, all this stuff you've learned about the ground game goes away. These are all basic concepts and stuff that are very hard to learn without a place to learn them first. And then you get to this decision making. This right here, I think a lot of fighting game players, even at like an intermediate level, struggle with this part. A lot of intermediate players will not be able to recognize the bigger picture on decision making. You have to know the risk reward in every situation, but you also have to just accept that sometimes you make a decision and it seems pretty good and it doesn't work. Yeah, the Xiaohai versus Itabashi match analysis is a good example of all of this. Xiaohai is playing at a top level with he's only up until like here. That match is just Xiaohai playing extremely simple. It's rotating between 3 different grounded options, 3 different styles of play on the ground, and good anti-airs. And that's about it. It's not a very fancy match. He can get by without really studying the most intense, deepest part of the game, and I think that is one of his biggest strengths. It's also one of his biggest weaknesses. I like this section of the article quite a bit too. The idea of the initiator is really cool. The initiator versus the zoner in mind games. Who has the advantage? They use the example of Axel versus Soul. The initiator is the one who has a favorable position and can initiate moves that the receiver has to adjust to. Axel, if you guys don't know, he has these full screen chains he can throw out from full screen. He just has these long zoning tools. Soul is kind of like a Shoto, right? He has to approach in a situation like this. Axel is the initiator. He's the one that does stuff first. But the real mind game is when he stops being first. Axel has reach, and Rensen wins versus everything on the ground. This forces Soul to maneuver around it. Axel has the advantage because he can choose not to do Rensen, and Soul, however, must get in. So even if Axel doesn't do the thing that's really good, Soul is still at a disadvantage because he's the one that has to move in. Let's say Dalsum's answer to Ryu's stuff is like heavy punch, right? Because it goes under his fireball, or float. He doesn't even have to do those options. Ryu is already thinking about them. He has to get in. And it's the understanding of that is very important in a zoner versus rushdown character matchup. It is therefore not an RPS mind game, even if it is RPS, right? Because Axel's at advantage always because he's full screen. He doesn't have to even commit to any of these options. He can just sit there and wait. Because he initiates, he's constantly forcing a response from Soul. The initiator is whoever is at an advantageous position because it forces the receiver to make a decision based on the circumstances. The circumstances are you're full screen. I have moves that hit full screen. You do not. But this is written in 2016, before Soul ran 900 miles an hour. Now, that being said, there are zoning matchups where like the other character has really good ways to get past their zoning. Yeah, Yun versus Dalsum. Nobody's going to say Dalsum is the zoner. He's advantageous there, right? I mean, Yun he has moves that Dalsum has to think about in that case without committing. Every single time he jumps, he's scared of a dive kick. And he has to make a decision every time he sees him in the air. The Yun player doesn't even have to think about it. He can just empty jump at him. It's only about the opponent. I like this part too. How careful is the opponent? How risky is the opponent? Mind games on paper are much harder to discuss than what actually happens in the match, right? Different players have different tendencies, and what cements the framework for this is matchups. Some elementary principles on what you should look for. How is the opponent maneuvering? How do they like to move around the screen? Do they dash? Do they walk? Do they block? Do they crouch? Do they jump a lot? What are they doing? Does this opponent like to take greater risks? Do they like to take small risks? What moves and how much does the opponent rely on them? If you shut down one option, is it over? Is that the end? They just have no answer? Or do they have answers after that? Does the opponent tend to minimize risks? Does the opponent do low risk options all the time? If so, does that mean that you can take greater risks on your offense because you know that they're not going to be swinging on defense? It's all about the opponent, and the opponent at higher levels will be thinking the same thing. Therefore, mind games emerge as a constant interaction between two players. Your opponent's taking minimal risk? Cool, you should also do that because that's the only honorable way to fight. And I only fight honorably with my folded steel. Hell no. This motherfucker's not taking any risk. Run up there and command grab his bitch ass. That's how Kazunoko's brain works. I want you to know that. He doesn't say it, but he thinks you're a moron, and he's going to command throw the shit out of you. Then he's like, oh, you're risky, huh? You're scared? Let me just do this shallow little dive kick. Oh, a nice uppercut, idiot. That's how you have to play. It's an understanding. You have to lean on your opponent. You have to make them feel the pressure. It's cool. This is a great article. I highly recommend reading through this. And I think you will probably find the part of fighting game like understanding you are very quickly as you scroll down. You'll keep reading and everything will make sense to you, and then suddenly you'll run into something where you're like, I don't understand this. You're like, a fuzzy Abare, hold up.